up there. What I'm going to do is actually talk you through a little bit of the report that Rick talked about before. I think it resonates quite well with what Larry Summers was talking about, because we've been really thinking through what it is that inclusive growth and development means and what are those factors that actually drive it. And actually, I'm one of the co-authors. Rick Sammons is our fearless leader. And the person who actually did the work is Gemma over there, Gemma Corrigan. So I give all the credit actually to Gemma. So what I'm going to do is I'll just talk you through exactly. Who has slept at the office, I think, several times over the last year. So what I'll do is I'm just going to talk through very briefly, why it is that we're thinking about this issue. I think that this probably won't be news to everybody, but just a little bit why the World Economic Forum is tackling this issue. And then what it is that we're thinking about in terms of inclusive growth and some of the basic results. And then very quickly we'll go over to all of the wonderful presenters of their ideas, because that's really, when we kind of put the meat on the bones of this stuff and we see how we can actually do something about it. So why is it that we wanted to work on the issue of inclusive growth? It was mentioned already many times, but if you look at data that comes out of either the OECD, the IMF, or many others, you'll see that income inequality is indeed rising. This is for the OECD countries. It's risen over a period of about 25 years in almost all of the OECD countries. And you see the same thing in many developing countries. And why does that matter? Because, again, organizations such as the IMF, the OECD, and some among us who are actually working on this have been able to quantify the extent to which that inequality is actually bad for growth. And so this is something we've been getting concerned about. At the same time, we actually have a report that we come out with every year called the Global Risks Report that looks at the interconnections between many different risks. And for the last several years, what's been popping up at the top of this interconnections map is really the relationship between this income rising disparity and a lot of the other socioeconomic risks that we're worried about. Obviously, unemployment, underemployment, but also even profound social instability. So it really would range from sort of the depressed consumption that you see in the US all the way to the Arab Spring. So what is inclusive growth? And I think the way that we've been talking about it as sort of a Venn diagram, if you think about the two circles, one representing social inclusion and the other economic growth, if you think about that space in between, there's actually quite a lot of policies, as Rick mentioned earlier, that really drive both. And that's what we've been trying to capture. And it's really all about the fact that you can have a growth process that is bringing much of the population along with it if it is proceeding in the right way. So what do we put in there? We basically have boiled it down to 7 areas that are then made up of 15 sub-areas, and then a number of indicators, I think 122 some odd, or 144 even, yes, Gemma will correct me. And we're covering 112 countries. And let me just quickly go through them because Rick did mention this, but just to give you a sense of how we're looking at this. Clearly, if you look at the bottom, on the right-hand side, you have the fiscal transfers, the taxation and transfers, the extent to which they're progressive. This is clearly an important part of the story that people tend to talk about, redistribution. Also, education, the other side. Sometimes people will go so far as to talk a bit more about education as well, that's important. And these are very important factors, but they're not the only ones. And by the way, in education, we're looking at quantity of education, number of years of schooling, the quality, but also the quality of outcomes. The extent to which children at different levels of income backgrounds will actually have different kinds of outcomes. But as you see, there's a number of other areas that we're looking at, just giving you a sense of the extent to which really there's many things that are really both driving growth and driving social inclusion. And let me just go through them from left to right after education. We're looking at employment, really employment as well as wages, and the extent to which you have gainful employment, wages that are rising over time. Asset building and entrepreneurship, those things that allow people to actually create jobs, create their own employment. Financial intermediation, and really, kind of access to capital, really for real economy investment that allows, again, for new job creation. Corruption and rents, I think this is something that is often neglected in this debate. If you think about something that's a total growth killer, as well as something that completely excludes people, it's when people at every different level are exploiting their bit of power, whatever it is, vis-a-vis those who are a bit below them. And finally, basic services, including health, infrastructure, transport infrastructure, digital infrastructure. So really, that's kind of the universe of things that we're looking at. And if you really think about all of them, they can really drive both growth and social inclusion. And these are the things that we really think are the sort of explanatory variables of inclusive growth. I'll just mention that unlike the Global Competitiveness Report that we also put out, and that came out yesterday, you might have seen, we don't wrap this up into one overall number. What we do instead, because the data's not good enough yet, it actually doesn't cover all countries, even when we find it. We'll have some data from the OECD for the more advanced economies, some from the World Bank for the others. Also, because we're not really sure how to weight these things. You know, I mean, right now we're not sure. Should we weight education as more important than basic services, et cetera? So what we do is we look at economies that are similar in terms of income levels. We look at high income, upper middle, lower middle, and low income, and then have wrapped up rankings for each of these 7 areas, the 15 sub-areas, and then all of the indicators. So you still can get a lot of information, but we're not kind of wrapping it up into that one sexy thing that the press tends to take on. Maybe eventually we will, but for now, we feel quite comfortable doing it like this. The last thing I'll just say, and this is the one slide I'll spend just a bit more time on than many of the others, is that you see the traffic light colors of the different parts of that leaf. What we're trying to do is show that, and you'll see with some of the comparisons that I'm going to show you, the size of the leaf, or the size of that part of the leaf in all the areas, will be the underlying score on a scale of 1 to 7, how they're doing absolutely across the entire universe of 112 countries. But the colors are vis-a-vis the other economies at their stage of development or their income level. And so what you're going to see is for countries that are in different income levels, how well they're doing vis-a-vis their peers. So that we're comparing apples and apples. One last thing I would just say about the methodology is that we have also been doing some thinking about that sort of beyond GDP debate. So if everything I've just described to you are sort of the explanatory variables, those things that are describing, you know, what drives inclusive growth, well, what is inclusive growth? Well, inclusive growth is obviously not just GDP growth. And so what we've been thinking around, you know, are around these lines, that if you think about key performance indicators that could wrap themselves up into some sort of inclusive growth indicator, it would be those things driving growth and competitiveness, those things that really give you a sense of equity of incomes, Gini coefficient, poverty, et cetera, but also very importantly, the intergenerational equity question, both in terms of how we're treating our planet and what we're leaving in terms of the environment and environmental problems for the next generation, but also in terms of debt. And so for the public finances, what kind of healthy public financing are we leaving for future generations? I'm just going to give you a few quick examples. All of this is available online. It's interactive, et cetera. A few examples of countries and how they do. And again, remember, the size of the leaf is the part of the leaf is the score out of 7. And then the color is how it's doing in the ranking vis-a-vis the countries of its same income level. And so what we see here is Finland is one of the countries that's doing better across many different areas. Not surprising that it's doing very well in education. It does well not only in the quality of education, as we see often in the PISA scores, but also in the equity of outcomes, as we're seeing as well. Also well in terms of, you know, sort of lack of corruption, basic services, and so on and so forth. Less well in terms of fiscal transfers, but perhaps because that's less necessary, because it's doing quite well in terms of the pre-transfer Gini already. The second is the United States, and we felt the United States, of course, is really always shocked when it's not, you know, at the top of any kind of ranking. And what you see here is that the US is actually not doing very well in terms of inclusive growth. It does very well in terms of asset building and entrepreneurship. All those things around innovation. It's the world's innovation powerhouse in many ways. And yet really falls short in many of the other areas, whether it's sort of access to basic services, not very much use of fiscal transfers, but very important also employment. And although unemployment has certainly been coming down in this country and is not very high right now, that's because wages remain very low. And you don't see in this country sort of median wages rising over time. Finally, Greece, among the advanced economies, and then I'll look at a couple of the economies from other income levels. Not much to say here. Greece is really struggling, and Greece is both not doing well in terms of growth and as well as in terms of the areas that would drive social inclusion. I wanted to give you 2 examples of countries at other levels of income. Brazil is an interesting case because, I mean, as many people know, it has a very interesting system or different systems of transfers to families. So really using the fiscal transfer area well. Some areas of employment. Remember, you can't compare these colors to the ones that we just saw because now it's compared to other upper middle income countries. But doing very badly in a number of the areas that we know. Education and especially corruption. Big issue in Brazil. I think that probably won't surprise anybody given the discussion today. And I just wanted to end on Tunisia, which I think is an interesting case because that's sort of where the Arab Spring began. And this is a lot about, sort of disparity in social systems. But what you see here again is that, Tunisia is doing quite well compared to other lower middle income countries in a few areas. So making some use of fiscal transfers, providing some basic services to the society, but where is it falling short? Particularly in the area of education and in employment. And in employment there, that's because basically, there are low wages, there's few jobs, and many, many young people are pushed into the informal sector. So this is very much the story that we recall from what sparked the Arab Spring. So just a few things on key learnings. I think, clearly the debate on inequality and social inclusion has been too narrow. This is something that Rick mentioned earlier. There's a lot of focus on redistribution. Sometimes there's a focus on education, and those things are really important, but there's a lot of other things we can do, and it makes it much less polemic when you're not only talking about taxation and redistribution. The second is that it's possible to be pro-equity and pro-growth at the same time. The Global Competitiveness Report came out yesterday, and if you compare the results of the competitiveness report with these, you'll see that many of the countries that do well in one of them do well in the other. So these things actually go hand in hand quite often. Promoting social inclusion is not only in the purview of the high-income economies, and I think this is something we saw by some of the other examples. There's many areas where countries, Kenya in terms of financial inclusion, there's many examples of countries that are doing quite well and punching above their weight in particular areas, and that's something that is really important to emphasize. And finally, all countries have room for improvement. Even if you think back to Finland, maybe you can't picture it in your mind, but I assure you that none of those leaves were at a 7, right? I mean, all of the countries basically still have things that they could do in order to encourage more inclusive growth. So just on this, all of this is available online, and encourage you to take a look at it. It's a beta version. We wanted to come out with it so that people will come and tear it apart and tell us what we could do better. But we do think that it sort of sets the scene in a nice way for the discussion that will follow. I'll just say that this is part of a big project that the World Economic Forum is doing on economic growth and social inclusion. This is part of that whole project where we're going to, we have, kind of fodder for discussion, and then we also will have a global dialogue series. We're going to be driving this into the regions. And very importantly, we need to collect good practices because it's very nice to know what the problems are, but it's just as important to know what the solutions are and what you can do about it. And that's what we're really hoping that we'll do today. So with no further ado, I'm really happy to now go out to all the wonderful authors of the 11 different practices that we have here. So maybe we can start. What we're going to do is, and just, 1 minute to the extent possible. If you go over a little bit, that's okay. You're going to hear more from all these guys tomorrow, but just to get a sense of what to expect tomorrow. So first, Anthony Altbecker, who's from the Harambee Youth Employment Accelerator.
Hi, I'm Anthony. I'm from South Africa, which I guess sets the standard for exclusive growth. We're quite proud of our achievements. I'm not really from the Harambee Youth Employment Accelerator. I kind of do a whole lot of different things, but I was part of the kitchen cabinet at the start of the when Harambee was first being designed. Harambee seeks to place young people who are particularly excluded from the labor market in entry-level jobs in the formal sector. The theory being that's the best kind of inclusion that's conceivable. South Africa has very, very high levels of unemployment. That unemployment is not randomly distributed. And if you can break through some of the dynamics that reinforce themselves intergenerationally and through families and households, then you can have a much longer term effect than any other kind of intervention. Harambee's been going for about 4 years now. It's a public-private partnership. It works very closely with employers. works with about 200 employers. It has been approached by over 500,000 young people for looking for opportunities, and has so far given some form of training to 140,000 kids and has placed 16,000 in informal sector jobs, most of whom are in jobs where the feedback from employers is that they are exceeding industry norms for retention over the first year.
Great, thanks so much. And now Editayo Bamiduro, who's actually doing a project on, or going to talk to us about a project on unlocking Africa's full retail potential with a crowdsourced on-demand delivery platform. That's a mouthful.
Hi everyone, my name is Editayo Bamiduro from Nigeria. So the project is called Max. It started as a research project at MIT. I did that for about a year with a couple of other friends, and now it's a company. So what we're doing essentially is to create a fulfillment infrastructure for retailers in Africa to be able to deliver products to consumers when they order online. So it's quite easy to build a website for your business and put your products online, right? But it's very hard to fulfill, when people buy stuff, to transport that product from your store to the end consumer. So in a place like Lagos that has 20 million people, 1,000 square kilometers, it's 3 times as dense as New York City. It's a very small place geographically, but it takes retailers about 4 days to get products to the end consumer within the same city. The average Lagosian spends about 5 to 8 hours in traffic on a daily basis, so it's really insane. But what we do is we use a network of motorcyclists and we use mobile apps. So whenever people order products online, you can connect a motorcycle delivery person with the merchant immediately, instantaneously. It works like Uber, and then they can deliver for them. So that's essentially what we're doing, to empower retailers to be able to deliver products very quickly in African cities.
Great, and we'll hear more about that tomorrow. Stephanie Bauer, unfortunately, her flight was delayed, so she'll be meeting us tomorrow. But she is going to be talking about democratizing incubation and creating a virtual startup ecosystem, which sounds like an interesting kind of overarching theme. After, we're going to look at Lucio Castro, who's looking at the BRICS savings account.
Hey, thank you. I'm Lucio Castro from Argentina. I work at CIPEC. It's a think tank based in Buenos Aires. And this idea we developed with Eduardo Levi-Cecciati, who is a faculty here at the Kennedy School. And basically what it tries to do is to solve 2 problems. One is financial inclusion, and the second one is housing deficit. Maybe you don't know this, but in Latin America, around a third of the households live in houses which are completely in inadequate conditions. 3 million lives in houses beyond repair. So the idea is to develop a commitment savings account combined with a credit line attached to a predefined goal for housing improvement. And we help with this to try to foster financial inclusion as well thus financial housing deficit in Latin America. Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot. And now Catalina Garcia.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, there you are.
Thank you. Well, Amelia is telling me, why don't you tell a little bit about yourself before saying a little bit about what you're going to hear about tomorrow. So I'm Catalina Garcia. I am the head of communications and sustainable development for SAB Miller Latin America. SAB Miller is the beer and beverages company, the second largest. Well, really what you're going to hear tomorrow is one of the most beautiful projects that I have been leading in my life. I'm working for a company that is taking care of people that really need help. Those are very small retailers that sell our product in Latin America and in Africa, which are the largest regions of the company. These small retailers are part of a very large population, very poor population that have a lot of needs to fulfill. So we designed a program that is focused on helping these people to face challenges such as very, very low and limited business and life skills, no access to finance, no access to technology, and they are informal businesses. So in this process of improving the life of these people, their business, we are working with a lot of partners to improving these conditions and make these businesses more sustainable and helping them to have opportunity to grow and improving their livelihoods. So that's what you're going to hear about tomorrow.
Great. Thanks, Catalina. And the next is Laszlo Juhász, who's doing
Hi.
breaking barriers to the labor market.
Yes, exactly. Good evening. My name is Laszlo. I am coming from Hungary, from Central Europe, and I am working for the Boston Consulting Group, BCG. I am leading the office of BCG in Budapest. And basically, about Hungary, you have to know that one of the biggest social problems in Hungary is the situation of the Roma population, which is a handicapped population in many senses. And BCG has every year a social impact program locally, also in Hungary. And 2 years before, we were thinking about what could we do to actually contribute to improve the situation of the Roma population in Hungary. And as a first reaction, we said that the problem is too big for us. We are a small consulting company. We are not able to really solve the issue of this population. But then we came to an idea which we believe is a smart one, that we might be able to help on one of the issues, which is maybe the most important one, the employment. And we basically set up a program which we call the Integron program, which is a multi-stakeholder cooperation between civil organizations, between the largest companies in the country, and between BCG. And we basically created a mechanism with which we try to create the link, create the opportunity for the Roma people to get to normal corporate jobs with the local and multinational companies in Hungary. And how it works and what is the impact, I will be very happy to share with you tomorrow. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Laszlo. Now we're going to go to David Michael, who's going to tell us how more mobile subscriptions drive inclusive growth tomorrow.
Thanks, Jennifer. So bear with me for a minute in the following thought exercise. So I have a special announcement from the Kennedy School, which is that for the next 24 hours, the mobile phone network is shut down. The Wi-Fi network is shut down. Your phone doesn't work. Also, I've got another bulletin, which is that your children's phone will not work for the next 24 hours. And that may be a good thing. And your parents' phone won't work. And the phone of any loved one will not work for the next 24 hours. So look at the person next to you. Their anxiety has probably gone up. Their blood pressure has gone up. Their productivity has gone down. It seems inconceivable. You'd rather have the lights off or the power out than your phone off for the next 24 hours. And yet for billions of people, and even by the year 2020, that is still the reality of every day. So tomorrow we'll talk a little bit about why that is and what we might do to change that situation. Didn't we all just feel a little less included than we previously did? So I'm David Michael. I've had an amazing career as a management consultant across emerging markets. Most of my career has been spent in China. I've worked a lot in the telecommunications sector. I've also led a lot of my firm's research on different issues of consumer experience in emerging markets, and some of the work that relates to that and how people relate to mobile telephony and how many people are still excluded from the most advanced mobile telephony has led to the proposal that we put together and that we look forward to sharing tomorrow. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, David. Okay, so now, great. Hugo Panizza, who will tell us about improving savings.
Hi, I'm Hugo Panizza from the Graduate Institute Geneva, where we produce great economists.
There you go.
So I'm a professor there. I'm also the head of the economics department. I usually do research on public debt and sovereign and international finance. This is slightly different. So if you study economics, at some point, some relative, friends, whatever, will ask you how to invest their money. And usually you don't have a good answer for this. So when you give them the answer you want to give them, they'll tell you that it's a stupid answer. And then I was reading at some point that actually rich people invest their money well and poor people don't invest their money well, and this amplifies income inequality. So there is income inequality because rich people earn more money, but also they manage their money better. So if you could find a way to get middle-class people, probably, this is a proposal for middle-class people, it's not for poor people, to manage their savings better, this would be a way to reduce income inequality. So my proposal is about this, exactly how to get middle-class people to participate more in risky asset market and diversify better. I was very excited about the billions part, but then I saw that Gretchen has trillions, so now I'm very jealous.
Great, thanks, Hugo. Now, Gretchen Phillips will tell us about the human potential and how that fits into the equation.
Great, thanks, everyone. Great to meet you. Look forward to talking a lot more tomorrow. I'm Gretchen Phillips, a proud alumni of the MPID program here, and just in from Manila to talk to you about the $1 trillion opportunity and really focusing the discussion tomorrow on visibility into human potential as a pathway to inclusive growth. So here what we're really looking at is a wave of new technologies that's recently come out, which helps us measure things which have historically been very difficult to measure. One's social and emotional competencies, one's mindsets, these kind of difficult to measure things that we all know are critically important to one's success in educational endeavors, certainly in professional endeavors. There's a whole bunch of new tools that have come out recently, and we're going to talk about some of them tomorrow. And what we're particularly looking at in the Philippine context is how can we use these tools to create better pathways, particularly for youth, to improved educational and professional opportunities, such that the returns to education are better for them, such that they have equality of access to professional opportunities. And we believe that this has tremendous potential to unlock a wave of inclusive growth, not just in the Philippines, but globally. Thanks.
Thanks, Gretchen. And now we have Boosie Harambee, who's going to tell us about how you can reinvent the corner store for inclusive growth.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. My name is Boosie Harambee, and I am from Johannesburg in South Africa. Nice meeting you, Anthony. If inequality was an Olympic sport, obviously South Africa would definitely get the gold medal on that. So during the day, I work for a bank, but on weekends and evenings, I focus on projects that try to make a change in society. So I'm sure lots of you guys can relate to corner stores and what their value in the various communities, that it goes beyond just providing groceries and all of that. So over the years, I've observed a worrying trend where these businesses are either shutting down or not really growing. So I believe that technology can play a critical role in reinventing these businesses to try and optimize their supply chain inventory management, but also taking it a step further to try and build ecosystems around these small businesses. So tomorrow I will dwell on the details of that. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. And finally, Ashish Rana will talk to us about a geolocation-based public information system.
Hi, I'm Ashish. I'm from India. So the idea is to create a system that enables government organizations to communicate better with the citizens. So the problem that we are solving here is that the government organizations have a lot to share, a lot of information, but the available channels like traditional mediums or social networks are very costly. And so the idea is to provide an alternative low-cost system that enables them to share information effectively and continuously.
Great, thanks. So I think we see that we're going to have a very interesting and diverse discussion tomorrow. And I think that we'll all get ready to roll up our sleeves and be able to build those out.